Thanks, Charles. Our guest speaker for tonight is the Republican candidate for sheriff for Hamilton County here in this coming up election. Gary Lee is a retired Cincinnati Police Department captain, and he served there for 33 years. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Criminal Justice from the University of Cincinnati. He is a graduate of the Police Executive Leadership College, graduate of the 218th session of the FBI National Academy, and also a graduate of the Senior Management Institute of Policing. Most recently, Gary obtained a Master's of Arts in Counseling degree from the Cincinnati Christian University. With that, I'll give you Mr. Gary Lee.
My name's Gary Lee. You've heard a little bit about me. I started out my police career actually as a special deputy with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department back in 1977. I wanted to see if policing was something that I would be good at. So I started out as a special deputy, which in essence is like a volunteer police officer. And was served there for about 2.5 years. I decided I wanted to enter into law enforcement as a career and began applying to various departments around the county, fully expecting that I would be in one of the small suburban municipal departments or a county department, and actually wound up getting hired by the city of Cincinnati first. The interesting thing about working for a large police department is you can stay with the same organization, but you wind up working in a lot of different assignments. And over the course of my 33-year career, I worked in 17 different assignments within that department. So it was really neat because every couple years, every year and a half, it was like I got a totally new job, but yet stayed under the umbrella of the organization. Now, why that's important is because I had the opportunity to function in a lot of different responsibilities when I was with Cincinnati. I was in several different patrol assignments, several different investigative assignments, and several different administrative assignments. And if you can imagine having all of that grassroots experience where you were actually doing the work yourself as an investigator or as a patrol officer or as an administrator, that experience was invaluable to me. And when you take that experience and couple it with the training, the specialized training that I received, I feel as if at the end of my career, I had achieved a very successful and fulfilling career for myself personally. And also when I left the organization, I knew that I had provided excellent service to not only the department, but to the communities I served. The last 12 years of my career is when I was a captain, and in our organization, that is considered part of the executive command staff. One of my last command assignments was the commander of District 1 downtown. District 1 includes such neighborhoods as Over the Rhine, the West End, Pendleton, and part of the Central Business District. So if you can imagine what that must have been like, because at the time Over the Rhine was going through its economic redevelopment. And so it was a very interesting time because the policing style for that particular neighborhood was changing as the demographics within the neighborhood began to change. I went through 2 major riots during my career and went through the Federal Collaborative Agreement, which actually spanned almost 11 years, where we worked under the guidance of the Department of Justice in order to basically redefine how our organization thought and how we operated. And one of the core elements that came out of that collaborative agreement was a philosophy of community-oriented policing that emphasized the importance of police and community relationship. Because when I started my law enforcement career, crime was a police problem. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, if you had a crime problem, that was the police's responsibility to take care of it. But over the course of the next 3 decades, that philosophy began to shift. And we began to realize that crime wasn't just a police problem. Crime was a community problem. And the most effective way to address those issues would be for the police department and the community to work cooperatively together to solve the problems that were allowing crime to occur. Now that's a totally different philosophy than what many police departments even today have. And I think that's one of the shortcomings in the sheriff's department, is that they haven't identified the value of not only serving the community, but partnering with the community. Because it's through meaningful partnerships that success occurs. And my big fear is that, God forbid, I guess this is a good place for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the sheriff's department is going to experience a controversial incident like the UC Police Department has. And here's one thing that I've learned. You cannot wait until the crisis hits to go out and build your support system. That support system has to be built in advance of the challenges. And that's my big worry with the sheriff's department, is I don't believe they've substantially created those relationships so that if a controversy does occur, they don't have the community alliances in place that will help to support that agency. Now, in addition to my law enforcement experience, I also supplemented my career with a different profession. About 5 years before I was scheduled to retire, I wanted to stay connected with law enforcement in some way. And there was part of me that felt like there was still work left in me that I could be doing. Have any of you felt that way? That there was? I suspect you have, because that's why you're here. You still feel like there's work left in you that can be done. And so I decided to go back to school and get a degree in counseling with the intention of becoming a trauma therapist and counseling police officers, firefighters, and the military. Because guess what one of the biggest obstacles is for that population to get help?
PTSD.
Yes, PTSD, and the belief that no one else is going to understand what I've experienced because what I've experienced is so unique. Well, I realized that with my 33-year law enforcement background, I could break through that barrier. That they would know that I knew what they were talking about because I had felt and seen and experienced many of the same things. So, even though I was still working full-time, I went back to school full-time and got a 3-year degree, a master's degree in psychotherapy. I got my license the same year that I was scheduled to retire, and actually started in my private practice while I was still working as part of a transition. And I was very grateful for that, because imagine being with an organization that you loved for 33 years and all of a sudden not being able to go back. And the fact that I had something else to step into, and the fact that I still felt connected with law enforcement, helped me with that transition. And my private practice actually began to blossom. It was becoming quite successful. And then one day the phone rang, and some political and business leaders said, "Would you be interested in running for sheriff? Because we think you have the qualities and the capabilities to make a good sheriff for this county." So I thought about it and prayed about it for a little bit, and actually the decision took about 2 months before I fully made up my mind. But I said, I'll do it. And I have been working diligently ever since in preparation for this new responsibility that I think that God has set before me. So, how does all of that background make a difference to you? Well, what do you think the number one challenge is in our community right now as far as law enforcement is concerned?
Cocaine.
Heroin, drugs, but specifically the heroin epidemic. Do you know that last year, Hamilton County led the state in heroin overdose deaths? And for the last 5 years, Hamilton County has led the state in overdose incidents. So we have a long history of a continually growing critical problem. Why is it that Hamilton County is the third largest county in Ohio, but yet leads the state for the last 5 years in heroin overdoses? That was one of the things I began to look at. I worked 9 years undercover in the Vice Unit. So I would very frequently go out and buy drugs myself during that period. I arrested probably hundreds of drug dealers over my career. 2 years of that period, I was assigned to the Attorney General's Organized Crime Task Force and worked on an organized crime case that spanned from Lexington, Kentucky, all the way up to Canton, Ohio. We had the first $1 million cash seizure out of that case for the police department. So once again, it's about the experience that I've had. So heroin, under the current sheriff, has actually run rampant. Now there's a heroin coalition task force in this county that is very effective at what they do. And as the next sheriff, I plan to invest a lot more in that task force because I believe they're on the right track. They are identifying dealers, they're intercepting drug transportation into this area, they're arresting the offenders, they're seizing assets of drug dealers. So they're fulfilling that law enforcement responsibility. But when you look at what else I can bring to the table, I have 33 years of police experience and also have experience in treating addictions through my counseling training. I'm the only candidate that can actually bring those two disciplines together. I understand the dynamics of the addiction of the user, and I understand the dynamics of the trafficker. So I can look at both ends of the challenge and understand that each part requires different intervention. Here on this side, the law enforcement intervention with the traditional law enforcement efforts. And on this side, addressing the issues of the addicted person so that they can get out of that life cycle. Because the only reason why heroin is so popular is because there's a demand for it. So we have to reduce the demand as well as reduce the supply. And I think with my understanding of mobilizing and creating a collaboration between the mental health industry, the medical profession, the faith community, the school systems, all of the other stakeholders coming together, each one bringing an asset with them, understanding and talents, we as a team can work together in partnership to attack this problem. But there are other critical issues in our community. We've always had an overcrowded jail. And in the past, especially under Cy Lisa's administration, there were periods where the jail was under a federal court order to release prisoners. The sheriff had no choice. We're not under a federal court order now in Hamilton County. But yet our current sheriff is releasing prisoners before their sentences are up, just so that he can keep his jail population low. And how is that impacting you? Prisoners are being released from the jail every day, and the victims don't know it. The judges don't know it. And in some cases, the family members of the prisoner don't even know it. We just came across a story within this past month, very sad and tragic story. A young man named Alex, in his final semester at UC as an engineering major. So this kid's got smarts. His parents were middle class, successful. The father worked for Cincinnati Bell. The mother was a school teacher. So this is not your classic drug abuser. But during a chain of events, Alex becomes addicted to heroin. And he becomes so addicted he drops out of school. He begins stealing to support his habit, and eventually gets arrested on a felony drug charge and a theft charge. So he's standing before the court, Judge Ruhlman to be exact. And his mother and Alex agree that he is at risk because of his addiction. And they are both willing to accept the consequences of his behavior. And his mother is actually grateful that he's going to be locked up because she feels at least he'll be safe. So the judge sentences Alex to River Center, which is the other jail system here in Hamilton County, where he can start to get some remedial drug treatment while he's locked up. But for one reason or another, he doesn't get transferred to that facility and ultimately winds up getting released early on his sentence. He has to go back to court for a follow-up court date. The judge is surprised to see him walking into the courtroom because the judge still thought he was locked up. And he said, no, they released me early, but I'm still ready to go to River City. So the judge instructs him to go to River City right now and get yourself checked in, and writes a court order for that. He goes over to River City and becomes the victim of their bureaucracy because they tell him, we can't take prisoners here. You have to be transferred here from the Justice Center. So Alex sits in the waiting room until 7 o'clock that night, waiting for someone to try to figure out how he should do what he's been told to do. And he eventually leaves in exasperation because they said they can't take him. 2 days later, he dies of a drug overdose. The first time that his parents heard that he was out of jail was when they received the death notification. So imagine the shock that that mother had to go through. And there's at least 2 other exact same incidents. So part of our heroin overdose problem is actually prisoners that are under the sheriff's control that are being released early without any kind of aftercare in place. And they're being allowed to go back into our communities and reoffend either with their own drug abuse or reoffend with other crimes, because heroin drives our property thefts here in Hamilton County. Is that right, Chief? Heroin drives our property crimes. So every one of us in this room is affected by the heroin epidemic in one way or another. Maybe we know someone in our family or in our source of friendships that has had an addicted relative. Maybe we've been a victim of a crime that's been driven by heroin. If nothing else, our insurance rates and other living expenses are going up because of the impact that this is having not only on the health of our society, but the financial status of our communities. Yes, sir.
Recently, there were a lot of heroin overdoses in Cincinnati, and a lot of people died. Why not give the drug dealers an automatic 25-year life sentence? Or if the jails aren't enough here, let's send them to Guantanamo. And we're too easy on the drug dealers. We've got to be stronger on that, or it's going to get worse.
Yes. We've actually, within this last year, the prosecutor's office has begun prosecuting heroin dealers who are responsible for deaths as a murder.
Good.
And I think, have we gotten 2 convictions so far, Brad? There's actually been 2 convictions.
Right.
Where they're sentenced to murder.
Good.
So that is an emerging approach to that. And once again, that is part of what the criminal justice system can be doing more of. How can the criminal justice system do their job better? How can probation do their job better? How can social services? How can the medical community? All of us have to start figuring out different ways to approach this problem.
Good.
I think I am the best candidate for this position. I think I'm the best because of my professional experience, because of the competency that I have as the result of all of my training and my background, and because of my leadership qualities. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm definitely going to vote for you because you're best friends with my uncle. He retired from the Cincinnati Police Force back in '98. His name is Ken Schneider.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that you're on his email list, and he was a coach, so definitely going to vote for you.
Well,
You mentioned 2 riots. One was what, back in 2001 with Roach. What was the other one?
One was in the beginning of my career, back in the early 80s. That one wasn't as significant, but the Kevin Roach one in 2001, those were big time riots there.
So do you think there, I mean, with this outcome, starting next week on Tuesday, with that BC police officer, do you think there would be something happening again?
I hope not, obviously, but if you look at the incidents across the country, the civil disturbances have most likely occurred at the time of the incident. And there is less of an upheaval as a result of the court proceedings. So the majority of our civil unrest usually surrounds the immediate incident that occurred. That's when you usually see the uproar. But you know, we look at Ferguson, we look at Baltimore, we look at some of those other areas that have had significant disturbances. The court outcome didn't generate the energy that the original incident generated. So I'm hoping that'll be the case here. Now, the safety net that we have here that other cities may not have had is that strong community relationship. Even though this did not involve a Cincinnati police officer, it is taking place in the environment where Cincinnati has worked very hard with that community relationship building. So I'm hoping that part of the work that the Cincinnati Police Department has done will help to add to the stability of the community when the trial is over. So that's what I'm looking for. We'll see. It's kind of like the presidential election. Who knows? You know? But that's my best guess based upon what has happened in other parts of the country after the criminal trials, and me knowing this community like I do.
Do you think we're not as prone to outside agitators? So you look at Ferguson, and there's evidence of that as an example.
I don't think we're immune to outside agitators. In the 2000 riots, we did have outsiders from Chicago and Atlanta that we identified that actually came here to actually facilitate and perpetuate the civil disorder. So we're not immune to that. The question becomes, will they be allowed to coexist with the peer pressure that the community can create on its own?
And we think that Cincinnati's in better shape because we've had a better relationship because of the training that the police department has had under the earlier Justice Department.
Right. I think that we have a much better bedrock than a lot of other communities in the country because of what we went through. We were one of the first ones, Cincinnati was one of the first ones to successfully complete a collaborative agreement. And in fact, other departments were coming to us after that to use us as a model for how we did it. And changing a large organization's philosophy is not an easy thing. That's why it took almost 10 years. But we did get it changed. And I think we're a better department, and we're a better city because of the changes that occurred as a result of that agreement. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just curious about, I don't know, jurisdiction of the sheriff versus the Cincinnati police. Is it different types of things, or is it different areas?
Sure.
How do you?
That's a good question. First of all, a sheriff's deputies and a police officer have the exact same state credential to be a police officer. It's actually called a peace officer. But we all have to go through the same basic training to get our certification or license to be a police officer. So there's a fundamental sameness to all of that. Now, when it comes to the difference between the sheriff's department and another police department, that's more about jurisdiction. So, for example, within the city of Cincinnati, our police officers had law enforcement powers within the city of Cincinnati, just like your Mariemont officers have police jurisdiction within the city of Mariemont. The sheriff's department by statute is responsible for providing a jail and court services and police patrols for any part of the county that does not have their own police protection. So in some cases, the sheriff's department provides exclusive police support, police patrol, in communities like Silverton and Lincoln Heights and Anderson Township, because they don't have their own police departments. So where there's a municipality or a township that does not have police coverage, the sheriff's responsibility is to provide that coverage. Now, the sheriff's department, a sheriff's deputy has law enforcement authority anywhere in the county, as opposed to like the city of Cincinnati police officer having authority just within the confines of his city boundaries. So that's another difference.
So if I steal something from Walmart, I can be arrested by either a sheriff or a police.
Yeah, if whatever municipality that Walmart's located in, yes.
But if it was the city of Cincinnati, the sheriff could legally arrest me,
Mhm.
as well as the Cincinnati policeman could legally arrest me. So
Yes.
either one. So what is it, just who's called, or?
No, normally the sheriff will not be active in areas where there's another police department.
Oh, okay.
Now, there are some exceptions. Green Township on the west side, they have their own police department, but they also contract with the sheriff's department for additional police coverage so that they don't have to continue to hire more officers.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of a hybrid. They have Green Township police officers and sheriff's contract cars that work in that community. Now, with all these questions, is there something that you want to confess to?
I haven't stolen anything
We're
from
gonna
Walmart
have to
recently.
watch her at Walmart.
That's right, I haven't stolen anything recently.
Okay, all right.
Statute limitations.
Excellent.
I'll call Fairfax one.
When I go in, be alert. No, I've always wondered, because you periodically see sheriff's cars traveling in the city of Cincinnati, and I've always wondered what.
Well, didn't they have a collaborative type thing over the Rhine? The sheriff was working there?
There was a period back in '05 and '06, I think, where the city was talking about bringing in the sheriff's department to supplement the coverage down and over the Rhine.
No.
But then they hit their budget crisis in the county at the same time the city did. And they had to lay off deputies, and so they just did not have the manpower or the resources to do that. And I am not, by the way, a firm believer in a metropolitan police department. I believe that local municipalities should be able to police themselves in the manner and style that they need. I believe that your municipal police departments can be more responsive to the specific needs of the community that they're serving. So I am not a big advocate for a countywide metro police department. I don't think it's efficient and as responsive as what, for example, you would have here in Mariemont. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on the guns getting in the wrong hands of people? like teenagers?
Sure. I'm basically a Second Amendment supporter without revision. I believe that gun owners have a responsibility to handle and secure their weapons in a way that they don't fall into the hands of innocent users that would cause an accidental shooting or be the subject of a theft, which then allows that gun to go onto the street and be used as in a crime against others. So I think we should focus on gun trafficking just like we focus on drug trafficking. In fact, in many cases, in my experience, they're one and the same people oftentimes. But I'm not a big believer in, just taking all guns away or taking some guns away. I think the Second Amendment had a specific intention to it, and we need to honor that. And I think we need to prosecute people who cause crimes with guns more severely. In fact, in Cincinnati, we were very successful in prosecuting a lot of drug crimes that also involved guns. We prosecuted those federally and got a much higher conviction rate and longer sentences. So it was a very specific deterrent to certain types of gun crimes. And we were very successful at that.
Sure.
Yeah, Chief.
I believe, Tony, I think you probably agree with me, but as far as guns, guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens aren't a problem for anybody. And you take the guns away from law-abiding citizens, the bad guys are still going to get the guns. They're going to get them in the black market. They're going to get them, so then you're basically taking the law-abiding citizens' availability to defend themselves in their own home away. And I think, I agree with you, it's a bad thing.
Yeah. There are some gangs in America that specifically send their members who do not have criminal records into the military to get additional combat and tactical training through the military so that they can come back to the gang and be a resource for upgrading the level of tactics and armament for the gang. And that's a pretty scary thought when you think about it. But we've seen it in urban gangs, and we've also seen it in motorcycle gangs. There are members of motorcycle gangs that are specifically prohibited from getting an arrest because they're the designated CCW carrier for the gang when they're out, so that the gang can legally have a firearm wherever they're at. So there's a criminal element that's very creative and is going to find all kinds of workaround. And when we begin to take away the rights, the basic rights of our citizenry, and not effectively be able to mitigate the criminal behavior of others, I think that puts us at a disadvantage and an unbalance. Any other
One more question, if anyone has one. If not, thank you so much, Mr. Lee, for coming tonight.
My pleasure. This, by the way, is a fond childhood memory.
I have 6 tickets for you. I know, just don't give up.
There you go.
And I will buy them before I leave.
All right.
This is, I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Appreciate your support in November.